Hello, and welcome to the Argyle Finance Leadership Forum. My name is Nick with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have some important information to share with you, and then we'll turn the floor over to our esteemed speakers. First, we would like to take a moment to thank today's sponsors, Oversight, AppSen, and Bill. Our sponsors are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. We also welcome you to stay socially connected during today's event. For those of you who are active on social media, please use the hashtag Argyle Digital and follow us at Argyle Exec Forum. Also, be sure to follow Argyle on LinkedIn for special announcements. I would like to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we have curated based on the feedback we have received over the years from our members. We have worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. Finally, and most importantly, we want to hear from you. So during each session, we encourage you to submit your questions and comments in the Q&A box on your screen. Following each presentation, we'll have set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on your questions. Thank you again for joining us today. Now, let's get started. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator, Swetha T. Pai, Chief Financial Officer, Book and Street. We are excited to have Shwetha and our panelists with us for their panel discussion titled Stewards of Finance, Blending Traditional and New Finance Processes to Drive Value. Welcome, Shwetha. Over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Nick. Excited to be here. I'm Shwetha Pai, and I work as a CFO for Book and Street, but really I work as a fractional CFO to a lot of startups. I've spent a lot of my career in finance. A majority of it was in investment banking in New York City, but then I moved over to the corporate side, and I've really enjoyed my time. And now I help startups really build out their finance teams and go for their big fundraising and all of that fun stuff that is part of the startup package. But I am really excited to be here to talk about this topic of automation and how we can really meld the two kind of worlds of traditional finance with the new one. And I'm so excited to be here with Greg and Joel, who are our two panelists. I will give each one of them some time to introduce themselves, their great background, and then we'll dive right in. So Greg, let me turn that over to you. If you can just give us a quick background and on your experiences.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Greg Panic. I'm the Vice President of International for CTDI. We are a global telecommunications, engineering, logistics, and repair company. My responsibility is for our international division, which sits in Asia and Latin America with several sites in both regions. My background is both in accounting and finance with companies like Campbell Soup and Deutsche Bank in New York City. Mostly financial services, also have done a lot of mergers and acquisitions and integrations as well. So look forward to having the discussion with each of you and answering all the questions we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And Joel?
Thanks, Swetha. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be with you today. Joel Penny, currently at Advanced Energy. So we do power conversion, precision power for mainly the semiconductor industry, also industrial medical as well. Just started this role, but previously was in biotech and pharma, doing a similar business partnership type of FP&A role, as well as business development. So a lot of transactional work, mergers and acquisitions, et cetera. Prior to that, have some experience in strategy consulting as well, again, in the merger and acquisition space. But started my career off at Raytheon, a large aerospace company, in their development program. So I got to see lots of different parts of the finance organization, really learn about the different functions, what I liked, what I didn't like, and that was a really good platform to start a career in corporate finance. So I've stuck with it, and excited to answer all the questions here today.
Yeah, wonderful. All right, let's just dive right in. The topic is really interesting. So so let me just start off with a broad question. So what does as stewards of finance, what does this really, the new what does that mean to you in this very dynamic time that we're seeing as far as automation coming on stream? There's a lot of AI. There's been a lot of robotic process automation, but a lot more coming, generative AI, machine learning. What does that mean for you guys as far as what have you seen? How do you think about your role in such a dynamic environment? So let me turn that over to you, Greg, first.
Sure. I think it is the role of finance leadership to evolve with the times. I think finance in any back office environment has been asked for the last 25 years to be more efficient and effective, right? Do more with less. We want as a business to put our resources into our operations, whether generating a widget or repairing a unit or selling something to the customer. So our task as back office leadership is to be able to get more effective. And I think that automation and the computer aided learning and process efficiency should be embedded in part of our process day to day. Where I think some finance staff gets lost is they get attracted to the hype of a computer program or software or a process, and they don't think of the practical impact of that to both their people and the process. It's the desire to get better is there, but the execution of that is a challenge. So I think being efficient and effective with where you invest and where you put your team's resources into it is critical. And I think the other piece too is making sure you're constantly working with your team. And ironically, I just had a conversation with some of our staff yesterday about this topic of process efficiency and effectiveness should always be top of mind. It's not just when something's broken. It should be a consistent methodology of the team, because we want our finance teams doing more analysis and execution versus data gathering and process components. So the quicker we can get to Bright on good information, the quicker we can get to the table with our operations leadership to be able to influence the business and change what we're doing, whether it's operationally or how we're pulling suppliers or however we're impacting the business. Joel, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Greg, as far as the mindset shifts to just continual improvement, process improvement all the time. So we look at that as well as a team and how best to do that. And so, again, it's a mindset. You have to equip your team and yourself with the tools to be able to think about everything that you're doing in that framework so that you can say, okay, we have to get X, Y, and Z deliverables out. How did we go about that? What worked well? What didn't? You can go through a list and try to, pinpoint bottlenecks in the process or just ways that you can be more efficient. I think to go to your other part of the question, Swetha, how does this evolve? What does this look like? What tools can you use, et cetera? It can be as basic as, the classic Six Sigma toolkit, right, of regular process improvement. But I think it's really important that you meet your organization where it's at and kind of assess it from the lens of where the company is. So I've worked at a couple different companies. They're all at very different parts of this path and this journey. And so some are far more advanced where we're already looking at, automated forecasting and how we can use different algorithms to help with that process and simplify that. And then I've been at companies on the other end of the spectrum where it really is back to the basics on we're doing a lot of manual work. How do we just automate that manual work, right? We're not necessarily looking too far into the future into a lot of the amazing technology that's out there, but it's more just incremental progress along the way and just trying to make do with what you have and try to make it better every day with the processing we're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's actually a really good point. It's a lot of it doesn't change overnight. And everything has to be kind of incremental and deliberate. Let me ask you, I recently heard this reference that AI should really be thought of more as augmented intelligence, not necessarily, so it's not something that will replace anyone. It's something that's there to help you augment your processes. So given kind of the new paradigm that we find ourselves in with finance processes coming on stream, but we're also always looking for cost effectiveness. How do you guys blend that, the old traditional kind of ways of doing with the new kind of technology that's coming on? Is there like a framework that you use when you're just like, yes, this will work for my organization? To Joel, your point that you have to meet the organization where it's at. So how do you determine, hey, you know what, machine learning will work, but generative AI, no, not ready yet? What is kind of that thought process? Joel, I'll start with you first, and then Greg, would love to hear from you as well.
Sure, yeah, great question. I think there's a lot of different ways to approach this, but I think it's all starting sort of in a planning and development phase, right? Kind of mapping out processes and trying to see what it is that your organization does. So as a finance team, what are you currently responsible for, current state, and then sort of mapping out what your ideal future state is as a team, right? So where do we want to be in 90 days, 365 days, whatever time frame you think is reasonable that you want to work towards, set those goals as a team and know that you can plan and develop and meet those goals and kind of back into it. So I think when you are switching any kind of process, right? So you go in and say, we're going to change something, you're going to be met with resistance, and that's okay. I think the most important part about that is that you get feedback from everyone before you kind of go and run and make a big change, right? People never like to feel like they get the rug pulled out from under them. And so especially if you're new to an organization, as I'm learning now, it's really that stakeholder engagement phase is super important, just to make sure that you have every aspect and every perspective of that process recorded, documented somewhere, so that you know what everyone's pain points are. It's important to be clear that you're not going to fix everything, right? And so it's not going to be a perfect solution, but again, back to incremental progress, you want to listen to those pain points, hear from everyone, and then fix what you can. And kind of, you want to map this out in a way where you use the lowest amount of effort for the highest amount of impact. So that's a tool that my team and I are constantly using, is just impact effort analysis. What's going to get us the 80-20 solution as fast as possible, and use the least amount of our time so we can address more issues than we would have otherwise. So I think it doesn't necessarily address the AI specific component, but I think the framework is the same regardless of where on the realm you're trying to improve.
Yeah, absolutely. Greg, any thoughts?
Yeah, so I think Joel hit on a couple of points that were I think really valuable, that would get lost in this process. I think, again, it goes back to people are enamored, whether it's software or AI, because it's the hot topic, or they went to a conference or they heard somebody on a podcast, right? And it's what's the end state we're looking to achieve. And I think that Joel really hit on that as far as what am I looking to solve, and is it going to get me there quickly and efficiently? And most importantly, is it going to be sustainable going forward, right? Because there's tons of investment that you can do that makes sense and have a big bang at the start, but 6 months in, when you're trying to run it and have it implement and have it impact the business, it becomes incredibly cumbersome, right? Workday is a prime example of people have to be eyes wide open going into a tool like that. Tremendously effective, has tons of upside, but they do data updates, I think, every quarter, right? You need to have a team that's available to update and validate and sign off on data. So it's the knowing what the future state looks like to make sure it still adds value, or is it just a resource or a financial draw that is giving me the big bang. I think the other piece that resonated with me and I think about consistently is change management, right? I think, Joel, you would agree. A lot of finance and accounting professionals are not coached or educated enough about change management and the importance of change management. And that includes communication, structure, planning, getting buy-in. To Joel's point, I think he hit on the head. If there's 10 people on the team, you're not getting 10 people who are going to be super excited and go, God, this is the greatest decision ever. you're going to be met with some resistance. So how do you work through that change management process if it's the best for the organization, explain and get to that right process? And then secondarily, if you are communicating, if you are going through the change management process, do you have the right people in place to execute? Right? People are so worried and nervous about change because they think it's going to impact their role, which is 100% valid, right? It's a human reaction. God, if they take this away and make this more efficient, then am I as valuable? How do I, what do I do? How do I hold on to that? So making sure that you're constantly talking to your people about the value add, and maybe it is moving someone to a different role where they could add more value, and constantly thinking about that and not letting the process determine that. You should be constantly thinking about that as a team leader. And then the final piece is coaching, right? Joel again touched on it with staffing and resistance. How do you coach your staff to embrace the change? Change is always hard. And to also be vocal enough if there is a severe problem that doesn't make sense to make a change, that you have people in there that are going to show accountability, whether it's a financial analyst on my team or the senior FP&A manager. I want them all to feel like they have a voice in the process. And if there's something really standing out that doesn't look right, that they're engaged in that process so that we're not going on a disparate path that's going to hurt us operationally 6 months from now. So, Joe, I didn't know if you had to talk about anything on top of that, but.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is what you just framed up is sort of building the right culture on your team to be able to digest these types of changes and actually work through them in a way that's efficient for the team to do. So, you want to build that, we call it a speak up culture, right? And be able to share your opinions. And when it's on a project like this, if you're, changing a technology or a tool, whatever that might be, you want the clear and honest feedback throughout the chain, right? Wherever that is. But that takes time to develop, and you want, the trust in your organization to be there so that everyone feels comfortable, bringing up any concerns that they do have.
Based on your experiences, and either one of you can kind of go first, but based on your experiences, which processes within finance have been kind of the smoothest as far as digesting that the change, and which ones have been the hardest and have had a lot more work to be done? What have you guys found?
So Joel, if you don't mind, I'll jump in on this one. So let me know if you have any conflict on it. But I think for me, the ones that have gotten the most pushback are the processes that are very labor intensive. And generally, I've seen processes where people are constantly complaining about not having enough time or concerned about not having enough time because the processes take so long. Also, in very standard processes like an AP and AR, those types of data generation, regular generation, because again, from an accounting perspective, as an example, there was a culture built up for years of people have checklists, right? And it's like, I've got to do this on day 4 and this on day 5, and I could do this process. So that rhythmic nature of process is really not, at what I've seen, not overly receptive to change, because they're used to a rhythm and a process, and anything that throws into that can get some pushback, not all the time, but at times. Where I've not seen it is people who are on data analytics, and I know for people that I worked with that did integrations and acquisitions, because it's a constantly changing environment. So they have to think on their feet all the time. There's no rhythm to the work they do. Every day is different. So when you institute a change, they're much more receptive to it. It's almost like being an ER nurse or an ER doc. Like every day you go in, something's different and you have to adapt and adjust. You have to critically think. So I think it goes back to the type of people as well. I only hire people that I feel could really critically think regardless of role, because I want people to be cross-functional. I don't want people kind of in these rhythmic roles because I want them to be engaged with the business. So Joel, I didn't know, sorry for jumping in there, but I didn't know if you had any
No,
counter thoughts
Yeah,
to that.
All good, and I totally agree with what you said. I kind of think about this in a really simple way, right? What's the complexity of the proposed change? And so for those things where it's one individual that can actually make the change because it's a report that they're responsible for, whatever that might be, you just need that one individual to think critically, like Greg said, about how am I doing what I'm doing, and is this the best way to do it, right? So that could be, weekly report, monthly report, whatever that might be. That usually doesn't have that much difficulty. It's the larger, more complex projects across the organization, whether that's the, rip the Band-Aid off, we need the new ERP system. There's so many dominoes to follow that, and it just gets so complex that that's a really large undertaking, and people are much more hesitant for that. So it's a simple answer, but I think it proves true time and time again that the complexity of the change, depending on what it is, really drives the resistance to it.
Yeah, no, exactly. What have you guys, I think that's the business facing side is very, it's always a very key component to always keep in mind, to your point, Greg. How have you guys, what are kind of the metrics, KPIs that you guys use to measure success here? Right. So as you guys are going through whatever the changes are, however, deep, stringent, to your point, Joel, like sometimes it's just small incremental. Sometimes you just have to rip that Band-Aid. But how do you guys think about like measuring success and making sure people are kind of going in the same direction? What do you guys, how do you measure that?
So for us, we live in a KPI environment at CTDI. We are measured operationally every day with KPI performance, whether it's on-time delivery or turnaround time or whatever the KPI metric. That carries all through the organization, which makes that process easier for the back office and finance support. I do think that it's leadership's responsibility to set those clear parameters of what success looks like. And I use a term called the feedback loop, right? Identification of the problem, what's the target, who's the ownership, and the timeline. And then a consistent follow-up, because as an example, we used to do all kinds of investments of capital investments or program investments at a former role, and no one would ever follow up to see if it was actually hitting the numbers that it was. So everybody put whatever was out there, right? So you have to invest the time to be able to very clearly define what that feedback loop is, right? And every project will be different. So you can't give a blanket answer to that question right away. Is it a financial metric? Are you hitting certain time KPIs on processing? Are you hitting certain data quality issues from a data scrubbing perspective? It is. But do you create a very clear feedback loop that has very clear accountability? I think that's the other piece that I constantly miss. They say, oh, we're going to, the accountable party is, let's say Joel's team is called analytics. Well, Joel may have 30 people. Like, who's the person that's responsible for that on Joel's team to be able to deliver that? So making sure it's a clear accountability. It's Greg Panic. It's due by the 13th of October. And these are the clear things that it's that is framework, right? Expectations set by leadership, but the metrics themselves really vary by project. Joel, I don't know if you have seen that.
By the way, I love how you said it. Like, the metrics aren't there for just the sake of metrics. They're a feedback loop. That's perfect. Yeah, absolutely. Joel, please, jump in.
Yeah. So what I would add there is that, depending on the nature of your business and sort of the phase that you're in, the KPIs are going to be different, right? So Greg mentioned that. I think the part that I would add is that you should also constantly be assessing if they're the right metrics still, right? As your business evolves, as you enter a different phase, as your metrics improve and maybe stabilize to some degree, okay, what's the next level of insight generation that we can go to? How else can we look at this business to derive that next incremental set of value to that? And so it's constantly evolving. And as finance leaders, you want to always have that mindset to say, are we still measuring ourselves in the right way? Is this still the right set? Because so often you get into a cadence here are the 5 things we look at, here are the 5 things we measure, and unless there's some massive strategy change from the top, those are the 5 things that we look at. And so just put on that critical thought hat again and think to yourself, are there other ways within the data that we have access to today that we can look at this? So that's the first part. The second part I was going to mention is just over time with how to manage all of this. I think, whether it's finance or another function, if you're fortunate enough to have a large enough organization that maybe has a project management function, is with all of these changes, you really have to put on your project management hat. And it goes back to Greg's point on accountability. But when you have somewhat of a larger process implementation that you want to put in, you need the Gantt charts, you need the timelines, you need the responsible persons, and you have to have updates, and you have to have communication out to the team as to where you're at, where you're going, and what's been accomplished, percent complete. And having that consistent communication really helps bring everyone along and make sure everyone's on the same page, so that it's not done in a vacuum and then some output happens that folks aren't up to speed on. So I think those are the 2 aspects that I would touch on. But Shweta, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on it.
No, yeah, no, absolutely. I think we have to stay dynamic. I think what's been interesting from my standpoint has always been this idea that hey, KPIs and really all this change management, a lot of what it does is it helps you focus on the more interesting part of finance, which is the strategic business partnering, right? So a lot of so I think that's often I think either of you, one of you or both of you, I think at some point mentioned like the resistance that people feel to it. But honestly, a lot of times the changes help you step away and become a closer member of that business executive team, or a closer member of that strategy team that's defining next steps. And to that point, I'd love to hear kind of focusing on kind of the future and the trends that you guys are seeing. What is it? What are you both seeing out in the marketplace right now, or in your day-to-day worlds right now, that you're just like, yes, we are prepping for that, and this is kind of how we're doing that? What are you guys seeing? Joel, I don't know if you want to start this one.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I think, we're taking an approach of kind of back to the basics, right? So you can look at this in a couple of different facets. And the first is, what do we already do that we could improve, either with some external capability, a new tool, what can we develop internally? And so you sort of look at your base processes and maybe weed out ones that you shouldn't be doing, ones that you should. And so that's kind of basic, and that's all the time. The second is sort of prepping yourself for the future to try to, stay in tune with the news and don't work in a silo, right? I think there's this common misperception that our brain trust within our company can come up with all the right answers, but it's
Right.
forums like this where you just hear about a new tool or a new software or a new capability or a new way of doing things. So I think this kind of cross-industry collaboration is huge, just because it gives you that little idea, right, to maybe go and explore further. And so as far as what we're prepping for the future, I think a lot of it goes back to that augmented approach that you were talking about before, Shweta, around here's a process that we have, here's something that could be not automated from an Excel perspective, but truly generative from a systems perspective, where it uses trend analysis, and it really is just sort of a high-end automation. And where can we substitute that in our current processes where it makes sense? And so that's kind of the assessment phase that we're at right now. I know some companies, my previous company was much further along in this, and they were already piloting, automated forecasting for entire business divisions. And so in that phase, it's a really big step to take, right? Because at what point does that become the truth that you're going to sign up to? And so that's a really long pilot phase. You have to do extra work in the short term, because not only have you stood up a team to go ahead and figure out how to automate this, you also have to have another team sort of validating all the data and doing twice the work to say, here's how our old processes, this is the result of our old processes, how does that match up? Where are the differences? Where are the pitfalls, perhaps? And so that process of change takes a long time. And it's also, it can feel duplicative in the moment, but it's really important to have the redundancy in the short term so you have confidence in that future tool or future steps, to know that it's getting you the data that you actually need.
Yeah, no, great point. And that is the redundancy, I think, is something that a lot of people crib about. But I mean, something like forecasting, automated forecasting, or at least like getting you started, start the baseline, right? Like how cool would that be? And then because then you can actually have conversations with your business about, hey, what are the strategic next steps? That's really awesome. I love that. Greg, did you have anything to add as far as future trends that
Yeah,
you're
I
seeing?
love Joel's comments with I think the thing that triggered for me goes back to people, right? We've talked about people being resistant to change. We've talked about people who aren't a right fit, or maybe aren't change champions, for using a project management term, which I'm not overly a fan of, but it gets the point. The part of that is fought by, does Joel know his team, right? And when you're doing a plan of this, he may have he or she who's on his team that is doing a role. They are responsible for revenue analysis for the Western region of X. But if Joel knows his team, he knows that that resource has aspirations of going into project management, or going into data analytics, or wants to go into programming, right? So understanding your leadership and expecting your leaders to also know their staff, because as these projects come up, I'm always surprised when I would say, hey, I'm going to grab Joel to pull this project, and people give you a look and go, why Joel? He's this. And you go, well, did you know Joel is interested in this, this, and this, and has a background, this and this? Because one of the other challenges for organizations, and it's happened in almost every organization I've been at, is they hire Greg to do X. Greg does X for 6 years, and then they forget that Greg had 20 years of experience leading up to that. They only vision that person as to what they've done within the organization versus what their skill set is. So I think I look at it kind of every year of refreshing my discussions with our team, like even to our analyst level, of going, what do you want to do? What do you want a career? So when you're making these decisions and you're setting these project plans, maybe you're pulling people out of roles, maybe out of their comfort zone, just to test how they evolve, can they change? Because the reality is, I want to create a cross-functional group that can move and grow and develop. And it's not just the process. It's not just the AI. It's not just cutting it from 4 hours to 2 hours. It's, do I have the right people in the right roles with the right skill set? Because that enables that mindset of change and consistent process, because leadership is concerned that Greg is worried about what I'm doing a year from now. The comment I would tell every manager that's doing it, and it's probably overly simplistic, but if I'm talking to Joel or Swetha as an example of, I talk about their personal toolkit, right? The bag they carry of what they bring to the table professionally. If after a year that toolkit is not enhanced, like you've not added pieces to that and things to your repertoire, management has to take some ownership of that.
Yeah.
It's not all management, it's also the employee's responsibility to continue to develop, but they have to find out develop and grow your team.
Yeah, one thing to add, because I think that's a really great point, is that you can use all of this improvement and kind of the transition to new processes as a professional development tool. So I think, a lot of the committees and work streams that we've had in the past have almost been completely voluntary, right? You say, hey, we're thinking about doing this. Who's interested in developing this skill, right? From a professional development perspective. And you get folks that, read an article about AI that say, oh yeah, this isn't quite that, but it's, it's along the same terms. Let me participate. So to Greg's point, you always want to be developing your team, and that can really help with talent retention as well, right? And I think that's a big aspect of concern for all teams these days. And if you can continually give people new challenges and allow them to learn, I think it's a win-win scenario.
Yeah, That's absolutely right. So let me kind of pivot a little bit because we got some really good questions from the audience here. So I just want to kind of address those. Two of them are a little related, I think. But let me just answer kind of one of the questions first, and then we'll go to the first two questions. But the third question we got was, how do you balance ongoing work with the improvement work? Where do the extra resources come from? And I know, Joel, you talked a little bit about it, but Greg, I don't know if, let me just turn it to you, just so you can kind of tell us what do you think? How does that redundancy kind of work out? And where, it's not just where do they come from right now, but what happens after it's done? Right.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's a fair question, right? And I was watching them come in, and that one struck me as well. So there is no magic answer that Joel or I can give to this group of how to resolve that, right? Every situation is different. I think that's first and foremost. Second part of it is time allotment and time management, right? We're always going to be asked to do things on top of our ongoing work. And process improvement enhancement is one of those things that is should be essential to all of our staffs to think about and frankly, maybe even put into their goals, right? So it becomes, to your point, part of their process for the year. So when you talk to them at the end of the year, or you talk to them in a mid-year, you say, hey, how do you improve the process, right? Because in the end, I want people adding more value to the business and doing less process, right? So that's part of it. But two of it, I think of it like a budget, right? So budgets are not part of the normal business process. It just pops up for 12 weeks a year, and everybody's always saying the same thing, like, how do I devote resources to do this with a budget? But you do because you plan for it, right? When we start our budget process at the end of August, I'm sending things out at the beginning of July going, make sure you line your resources up, make sure you plan out with customer meetings, make sure, start to think those things through, and making sure you're also getting people engaged, right? Because the one of the bigger problems in finance organizations, and hopefully this strikes a nerve with all of our people on the call, every organization does this. Joel and Swetha are about my best players, so I dump everything on Joel and Swetha.
Yeah.
And then Greg's over there in the corner going, hey guys, I'm leaving at 4. I'm gonna go grocery shopping and go home. And then people start to get frustrated, right? So it's the making sure you have the right division of work so that you're not just constantly relying on your heavy hitters, your A players, because every team has A players, every team has A minus B plus players, whatever, but really focusing on the development of your entire group and not just relying on your A players to get stuff done, because then you burn them out. And then you exactly have that hands up in the air going, there's not enough hours in the day. I just had this conversation with my boss 3 months ago, and he goes, well, have I ever stopped you from hiring? And I looked at him and I went, fair enough, right? So it was a 3-minute conversation. We got up, I had a rec within an hour, and we were hiring somebody. So it's like making sure the staff knows that it's going to be a balanced work environment. And if there is a need, you have to be able to bring in resources, but there's never, right, Joel? I mean, I don't know if you've seen something differently, but it is an interesting question. That's like a story as old as time.
Right. I think one of the things to add, and I totally agree with you around resourcing, is that, every organization, every finance, we've been trained over decades to be lean and mean, and that's what our function does, right? And so I think one of the important aspects of this is to, you're under the assumption at all times that everyone is at 100% capacity, right? Everyone's bandwidth is totally taken up, and so anything else would be 110% or 120%. I think one of the important things to do is kind of how you frame this up, right? If you're looking at a simple process improvement, you can build it into the current process. And so what I mean by that is by kind of planning for the future and knowing that, okay, if you look at the business case for implementing a certain solution, and maybe it's time savings or maybe it's money savings, whatever it might be, you can look at the long-term impact of that and build it in now. So if it's a process that takes 2 hours a week, okay, let's, for the next 3 or 4 weeks, it's going to take 4 hours a week, but we're going to make it better. And then that's going to save us exponential amounts of time for, the next year or two. And so if you can explain that up front in the business case to show what the benefit is, why it's worth investing the time now, and help your team prioritize. I think as leaders, that's one of the other things that we can do to step in, is to say, this is really important now. This is the right time to do this. I understand this might take a back seat for the next month or two. That's okay, right? And it's this constant trade-off of helping our teams prioritize what's really important, what's actually going to have an impact, and to Greg's point, where we can move along the business partnership curve to be a more strategic partner. So we can always get lost in the day-to-day shuffle, but we really have to be there to help support our teams to prioritize on the things that are going to provide long-term value.
Yeah, and that kind of dovetails nicely into one of the other questions that people, that the audience asked, which was, why are employees so reluctant to change? And, I think I see that a lot myself. I mean, there are people, and I have to remind people often, is that like, look, technology, AI, automation isn't going to replace anybody, but you will be replaced by someone who can use automation, who can use AI, who can use the new technology. So the key is to keep learning, but it's a hard lesson. What have you guys found as far as how do you get the buy-in, from your employees, from your team, but also how do you get buy-in from top down, from your management team? What does that kind of buy-in process look like for new changes that you want to implement? And Joel, I don't know if you want to go first here.
Sure, yeah, happy to. I think the most important thing that we can do from this aspect is, as far as getting buy-in and maybe changing some of the reluctance, comes from communication. So I think one of the things that Greg and I have in common in talking is that we're big fans of finance sort of as storytellers and helping develop stories, not just around the KPIs and the metrics that we're working with, but also in the change management aspect of things. So if you can communicate the whys, why do you think this project is the right thing to do? Why do you think now is the right time? Why do you think this is the right set of people to go about this? So kind of explain the why, but then also build the business case, right? That's always in finance's back pocket, whether it's for an investment of money, or in this case, maybe an investment of time. And so if you can build out that business case to show, here's the investment we're going to make, doesn't necessarily have to be dollars, but in resources. This is the benefit we're going to get. Here's why we recommend to move forward with it. That's a story, right? And you can explain that really quickly to anybody. To Greg's point, 3 minutes or less, and he gets to go hire somebody, right? So I think if you can build that business case, communicate the why, but most importantly, whoever your stakeholders are, put it into their context, right? So put their hat on for a minute and communicate in a way that they can receive. So not everyone is going to, see an email from finance and process everything that you said, but if you can put it in context of what the impact is to their part of the business, right? If it's your business partner or someone cross-functionally, how it impacts them, then you're building momentum to influence your entire organization, which is a really important skill set that I think we can all develop a little bit further. So Greg, see if you have any comments there.
Joel, you hit it on the head. I think for me, I think it goes back to the communication. We as finance and accounting staff have been operating in an environment for too long that people just hand over data and expect people to understand. And our job is to earn our seat at the table of the operation and executive leadership of the company to be able to influence decisions. We are an advisor, right? We are a consigliere. We are how do we influence the business? And that comes with communication and storytelling, as Joel framed it. I agree with him 100%. And I think it goes back to Swetha about one of the questions we got, really tied into question 5 and question 2 of where most change management fails is by not having upper management and executive management buy-in. Because Joel may have the greatest idea in the world, he has a team that's executing, but if he gets pushed back from one part of the business unit and they raise it up to the executive team and it stops, the project dies, no matter how valid, right? So getting the key executive leadership on board, he hit it on the head, the why. Why are we doing this? What's the impact? How's that going to change how's it going to change the department? And I think clearly communicating the why is also to why people are resistant, because most people don't understand the why. So I'm asking Greg to change his process or cut his, hey, you know what, Greg, I'm going to add AI to make your process 8 hours to 4 hours. Instantly, I go to, what does that mean for me? Because you know why? Because everybody has a mortgage and a car payment, a school payment, and everything else. And they think, does that impact my job? So if you explain the why and you explain the direction of the department of, hey, Greg, we're going to cut 7 hours out of your week because we really want you to engage in X, then that party is engaged in the process. And they know that not only is my team aligned, but my executive leadership is aligned as well, which gives me that the company has direction and plan, and also thinking about their people, that it's not just about reduction of heads, because that's the ugly part of what we do, right? We have to get more efficient and effective. And with that comes changes, but it's the, can we get people into roles that move around and be flexible? So if I create good flexibility, if there is reductions, people can go and I could put them in other roles where they can continue to be successful versus, you know, I'm just going from 10 to 9. Does that make sense, Joel? Are you?
Yeah, for sure. It's all about context and, you know, making sure that people understand the whole picture and how it relates to them, for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, did you guys have anything further to add to that question 5 that came in, which was, what are the biggest challenges you faced when trying to improve an existing process? And Greg, you touched on this a little bit with buy-in. Joel, did you have anything to add on biggest obstacles you've had to overcome?
Sure. I mean, we've touched a lot on change management today, so that's obviously a big pillar of this. I think the second thing is, you know, if it's a larger process, it's one of the bigger ones. I think some of the hesitancy there is around these band-aids that get placed right over time, and when you go to unravel that, it's a mess. It can feel overwhelming sometimes, and so what we try to do is use it as an opportunity to learn. Right, you're learning more of the process by kind of going through those different pain points and learning, oh, well, we bolted on this system, which is only half of the data, and trying to figure all of that out. So if you can frame it in a way that shows, you know, it's an opportunity to learn more about your company, more about the back end process, I think you'll ultimately get a better end state going forward. So it's really all about.
Great. All right, we got the 2-minute warning. So let me just do some closing thoughts. I mean, I think Greg and Joel, thank you so much for sharing so much of your thoughts around this and the ideas, advice, frameworks that you guys use. This was very helpful for me to hear. It's you know, and finance remains a very dynamic function with a lot of change happening, a lot of different things happening within the function. So it's great to hear from people who are actually experiencing it on the ground. I hope for the audience this was helpful. I'll just turn it over to Greg and Joel. Do you guys have any closing comments? Greg?
Yeah, sure. I will tell you, for those on the call, there's been a lot of discussions of resistance and how do you kind of overcome that? And again, there's no easy answer to that. But one thing I learned over time is there's only 2 reasons a team or a person is unwilling or really resistant to having you dig into their process. It's one, they know it's broken and they don't want you to find out that it's broken and that they've been existing with it broken. Or 2, they're unsure if it could be better or not, or broken, and they don't want you to find it and think that that's a reflection on them, right? And both of them are really not great reasons to be pushing back. And I think that's where finance leadership needs to come in and go, we're looking to do this to make your life easier. We're looking to make it more effective and efficient. And if we find something that's wrong, that's okay, because we're going to fix it.
It's not punitive. It has nothing personal to, yeah, broken process is a broken process. Yeah.
Right.
Joel, did you have any closing thoughts, comments?
Sure. Yeah. The only thing I'd like to kind of reiterate is just to, for the whole group to continue learning, continue being curious about all of this and what we can do to be more efficient and effective and kind of raising and elevating our function within the company that you're at. I think that's a really important mindset to have. And thank you all for your time today.
Yeah, likewise.
Great. Thank you guys for an excellent session. This was awesome. And I also want to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event.